Welcome back, everyone. Today we will be reading Chapter 13 of A Spell for Chameleon. So let's get into it. Chapter 13, Rationale. Chameleon was now well through her normal phase, which Bink had known before as D, and moving into her beauty phase. It was not identical to the prior Wen. Her hair was lighter in color, and her features subtly different. Apparently, she varied in her physical details each cycle, never exactly repeating herself, but always proceeding from extreme to extreme. Unfortunately, she was also becoming less intelligent, and was no help on the problem of escaping the castle. She was much more interested now in getting friendly with Bink, and this was a distraction he felt he could not afford at the moment. First, his priority was to get away from here. Second, he was not at all sure he wanted to associate himself in any permanent way with so changeable an entity. If only she were beautiful and bright, but no, that would only... Hold on. Where did I just... But no, that would not work either. He realized now why she had not been tempted by Trent's offer to make her beautiful when they were first captured outside the shield. That would merely have changed her phase. If she were beautiful when she was smart, she would be stupid when she was ugly, and that was no improvement. She needed to be free of the curse entirely, and even if she could be fixed permanently at the height of both beauty and brains, he would not trust her, for he had been betrayed by that type too. Sabrina. He choked off that memory. Yet even an ordinary girl could get pretty dull if she had no more than ordinary intelligence or magic. Castle Rugna, now that they were not actively opposing it, was a fairly pleasant residence. It did its best to make itself so. The surrounding gardens provided a rich plenitude of fruits, grains, vegetables, and small game. Trent practiced his archery by bringing down rabbits, shooting from the high embrasures, using one of the fine bows in the castle armory. Some of the creatures were false rabbits, projecting images of themselves a bit apart from their actual locations, causing him to waste arrows, but Trent seemed to enjoy the challenge. One he nabbed was a stinker, whose magic aroma was such that there was nothing to do but bury the carcass in a hurry, very deep. Another was a shrinker, and it died. As it died, it diminished in size until it was more like a mouse, hardly usable. Magic always had its little surprises, but some were good. The kitchen did need some attention, otherwise the zombies would come in to do the cooking. Rather than permit that, Chameleon took over. Assisted by advice from the lady ghosts, who were very particular about Castle Rugna cuisine, she made credible meals. She had no trouble with the dishes, since there was an everlasting magic fountain with aseptic properties. One rinse and everything sparkled. In fact, having a bath in that water was quite an experience. It effervesced. The inner partitions of the castle were as solid as the roof. There seemed to be waterproofing spells in operation. Each person had an opulent private bedroom with costly draperies on the walls, moving rugs on the floors, quivering goose down pillows, and solid silver chamber pots. They all lived like royalty. Bink discovered that the embroidered tapestry on the wall opposite his bed was actually a magic picture. The little figures moved, playing out their tiny dramas with intriguing detail. Miniature knights slew dragons, tiny ladies sewed, and in the supposed privacy of interior chambers, those knights and ladies embraced. At first, Bink closed his eyes to those scenes, but soon his natural voyeurism dominated, and he watched it all, and wished that he could, but no, that would not be proper, though he knew that Chameleon was willing. The ghosts were no problem. They even became familiar. Bink got to know them individually. One was the gatekeeper, who had looked in on them that first night when the portcullis crashed down. Another was the chambermaid. A third was the cook's assistant. There were 6 in all, each of whom had died inappropriately, and so lacked proper burial rites. They were shades, really, but without proper volition, only the king of Xanth could absolve them. And they could not leave the castle, so they were doomed to serve here forever, unable to perform their accustomed chores. They were basically nice people who had no control over the castle itself, and constituted only an incidental part of its enchantment. They helped wherever they could, pitifully eager to please, telling Chameleon where to search for the new foods and telling Bink stories of their lives here in the grand old days. They had been surprised and chagrined by the intrusion of living people at first, for they had been in isolation for centuries, but they realized it was part of the imperative of the castle itself, and now they had adjusted. Trent spent most of his time in the library, as if seeking to master all of its accumulated knowledge. At first, Chameleon spent some time in there too, interested in intellectual things, but as she lost intelligence, she lost interest. Her researches changed. Now, she looked avidly for some spell to make her normal. When the library did not provide that, she left it, to poke around the castle and grounds. So long as she was alone, no untoward things manifested. No rats, no carnivorous vines, no zombies. She was no prisoner here, only the men. She searched for sources of magic. She ate things freely. Alarming Bink, who knew how poisonous magic could be. But she seemed to lead a charmed existence, charmed by Castle Rugna. One of her discoveries was serendipitous, a small red fruit growing plentifully on one of the garden trees. Chameleon tried to bite into one, but the rind was tough, so she took it to the kitchen to chop it in half with a cleaver. No ghosts were present. They generally appeared now only when they had business. Thus, Chameleon did not have warning about the nature of this fruit. She was careless, and dropped one of the fruits on the floor. Bink heard the explosion and came running. Chameleon, quite pretty now, was huddling in a corner of the kitchen. "What happened?" Bink demanded, looking about for hostile magic. "Oh, Bink!" she cried, turning to him with woeful relief. Her homemade dress was in disarray, exposing her finely formed breasts above and her firm round thighs below. What a difference a few days made. She was not at the height of her loveliness, but she was quite adequate to the need. The need? Bink found her in his arms, aware that she was eager to do any bidding he might make. It was difficult indeed to steel himself against the obvious, for she also had much of D in her, the aspect he had liked before he understood her nature. He could take her now, make love to her, and neither her stupid phase nor her smart phase would condemn him. But he was not a casual lover, and he did not want to make any such commitment at this time. In this situation, he pushed her away gently, the action requiring far more effort than he cared to show. "What happened?" he asked again. It banged," she said. He had to remind himself that her diminishing mentality was the other face of her curse. Now it was easier to hold off her lush body. A body without a mind did not appeal to him. What banged? "The cherry." "The cherry?" That was the first he had heard about the new fruit, but after patient questioning, he elicited the story. "Those are cherry bombs," he exclaimed, comprehending. If you had actually eaten one, she was not yet so stupid as to misunderstand that. "Oh, my mouth!" Oh, your head! Those things are powerful. Didn't Millie warn you? Millie was the chambermaid ghost. She was busy. What would a ghost be busy with? Well, this was no time to explore that. After this, don't eat anything unless a ghost tells you it's okay. Chameleon nodded dutifully. Bink picked up a cherry cautiously and considered it. It was just a hard little red ball, marked only where its stem had broken off. Old magician Rugna probably used these bombs in warfare. He didn't like war, as I understand it, but he never let his defenses grow soft. Any attackers? Why, one man on the ramparts with a slingshot could decimate an army, lobbing these cherry bombs down. No telling what other trees there are in the arsenal, if you don't stop fooling around with strange fruits. I could blow up the castle, she said, watching the dissipating smoke. The floor was scorched, and a table had lost a leg. Blow up the castle, Bink echoed, suddenly thinking of something. Chameleon, why don't you bring in some more cherry bombs? I'd like to experiment with them, but be careful, very careful. Don't knock or drop any. Sure, she said, as eager to please as any ghost. Very careful. And don't eat any. That was not quite a joke. Bink gathered cloth and string and made bags of assorted sizes. Soon, he had bag bombs of varying power. He planted these strategically around the castle. One bag he kept for himself. I think if we are ready to depart, Castle Rugna, he said. I think we are ready to depart, Castle Rugna, he said. But first, I have to talk with Trent. You stand here by the kitchen door, and if you see any zombies, throw cherries at them. He was sure no zombie had the coordination to catch such a bomb and throw it back. Wormy eyes and rotting flesh necessarily had poor hand-eye integration. So they would be vulnerable. And if you see Trent come down, and not me, throw a cherry into that pile, fast, before he gets within 6 feet of you. And he pointed to a large bomb he had tied to a major support column. Do you understand? She didn't, but he drilled her on it until she had it straight. She was to throw a cherry at anything she saw except Bink himself. Now he was ready. He went up to the library to speak with the evil magician. His heart beat loudly within him, now that the moment of confrontation had come, but he knew what he had to do. A ghost intercepted him. It was Millie, the chambermaid, her white sheet arranged to resemble her working dress, her black hole eyes somehow having the aspect of once sultry humanity. The ghosts had become shapeless from sheer neglect and carelessness in the course of the past few centuries of isolation, but now that there was company, they were shaping up into their proper forms. Another week would have them back into people outlines and people colors, though of course they would still be ghosts. Bink suspected Millie would turn out to be a rather pretty girl, and he wondered just how she had died. A liaison with a castle guest, then a stabbing by the jealous wife who discovered them. A liaison with a castle guest, then a stabbing by the jealous wife who discovered them. What is it, Millie? He asked, pausing. He had mined the castle, but he bore no malice toward its unfortunate denizens. He hoped his bluff would be effective so that it would not be necessary to destroy the home of the ghosts, who really were not responsible for its grandiose mischief. The king, private conference, she said. Her speech was still somewhat windy, as it was hard for an entity with so little physical substance, hardly any ectoplasm, to enunciate clearly. But he could make it out. Conference? There's nobody here but us, he objected. Or do you mean he's on the pods? Millie blushed as well as she was able to. Though, as chambermaid, she had been accustomed to the chore of collecting and emptying out the chamber pots, she felt that any reference to a person's actual performance on them was uncouth. It was as if the substance were completely divorced from the function. Perhaps she liked to believe that the refuse appeared magically overnight, untouched by human intestine. Magic fertilizer. No. Well, I'm sorry, but I'll have to interrupt him, Bink said. You see, I don't recognize him as king, and I am about to depart the castle. Oh. She put one foggily formed hand in her vague face in feminine misgrieving. But see? Very well. Bink followed her to the little chapel room adjacent to the library. It was actually an offshoot from the master bedroom with no direct access to the library. But it had, as it turned out, a small window opening onto the library. Since the gloom of the unlit chapel was deeper than that of the other room, it was possible to see without being seen. Trent was not alone. Before him stood a woman of early middle age, still handsome though the first flush of beauty had faded. Her hair was tied back and up in a functional, fairly severe bun, but there were smile lines around her mouth and eyes, and beside her was a boy, perhaps 10 years old, who bore a direct resemblance to the woman and had to be her son. Neither person spoke, but their breathing and slight shifts of posture showed that they were alive and solid, not ghosts. How had they come here, and what was their business? Why hadn't Bink or Chameleon seen them enter? It was almost impossible to approach this castle unobserved. It was designed that way, to be readily defensible in case of attack, and the portcullis remained down, blocking off the front entry. Bink had been down by the kitchen entrance, fashioning his bombs. But granting that they obviously had come, why didn't they speak? Why didn't Trent speak? They all just looked at each other in eerie silence. This whole scene seemed to make no sense. Bink studied the odd, silent pair. They were vaguely reminiscent of the widow and son of Donald the Shade, the ones he had told about the Silver Oak so that they would not have to live in poverty anymore. The similarity was not in their physical appearance, for these were better-looking people who had obviously not suffered poverty. It was in their atmosphere of quiet loss. Had they lost their man, too, and come to Trent for some kind of help? If so, they had chosen the wrong magician. Bink drew away, disliking the feeling of snooping. Even evil magicians deserved some privacy. He walked around to the hall and back to the top of the stairs. Millie, her warning completed, vanished. Apparently, it required some effort for the ghost to manifest and speak intelligibly, and they had to recuperate in whatever vacuum they occupied when off duty. He resumed his march to the library, this time stepping heavily so as to make his approach audible. Trent would have to introduce himself to the visitors. But only the magician was there as Bink pushed open the door. He was seated at the table, poring over another tome. He looked up as Bink entered. "Come for a good book, Bink?" he inquired. Bink lost his composure. "The people! What happened to them?" Trent frowned. "People, Bink? I saw them. A woman and a boy, right here." Bink faltered. "Look, I didn't mean to peek, but when Millie said you were in conference, I looked in from the chapel." Trent nodded. "Then you did see. I did not intend to burden you with my private problems." "Who are they? How did they get here? What did you do to them?" "They were my wife and son," Trent said gravely. "They died." Bink remembered the story the sailor had told of the evil magician's mundane family, killed by mundane illness. "But they were here. I saw them. And seeing is believing, Trent sighed. Bink, they were 2 roaches transformed into the likeness of my loved ones. These were the only 2 people I ever loved or ever shall love. I miss them. I need them. If only to gaze on their likeness on occasion. When I lost them, there was nothing left for me in Mundania. He brought an embroidered Castle Rugna handkerchief to his face, and Bink was amazed to see that the evil magician's eyes were bright with tears. But Trent retained his control. However, this is not properly your concern, and I prefer not to discuss it. What is it that brings you here, Bink? Oh, yes. He was committed, and had to follow through. Somehow the verse had gone out of it, but he proceeded. Chameleon and I are leaving Castle Rugna. The handsome brow wrinkled. Again. This time for real, Bink said, nettled. The zombies won't stop us. And you find it necessary to inform me. We already have our understanding about this, and I am sure I would become aware of your absence in due course. If you feared I would oppose it, it would have been to your advantage to depart without my knowledge. Bink did not smile. No, I feel it behooves me, under our truce, to inform you. Trent made a little wave of one hand. Very well. I will not claim I am glad to see you go. I have come to appreciate your qualities, as shown in the precision of your ethic that caused you to notify me of your present action. And Chameleon is a fine girl, of like persuasion, and daily more pretty. I would much prefer to have you both on my side, but since this cannot be, I wish you every fortune elsewhere. Bink found this increasingly awkward. This is not exactly a social leave taking. I'm sorry. He wished now that he hadn't observed Trent's wife and son, or learned their identities. Those had obviously been good people, undeserving of their fate, and Bink was wholly in sympathy with the magician's grief. The castle won't let us go voluntarily. We have to force it. So we have planted bombs and... Bombs? Trent exclaimed. Those are mundane artifacts. There are no bombs in Xanth, and shall be none. Never, while I am king. It seems there were bombs in the old days, Bink said doggedly. There's a cherry bomb tree in the yard. Each cherry explodes on impact, violently. Cherry bombs? Trent repeated. So, what have you done with the cherries? We have used them to mine the castle supports. If Rugna tries to stop us, we will destroy it. So it is better if it lets us go in peace. I needed to tell you, so you could disarm the bombs after we're gone. Why tell me this? Don't you oppose my designs and those of Castle Rugna? If Magician and Castle were destroyed, you would be the clean victor. Not clean. It's not the kind of victory I want, Bink said. Look, you could do so much good in Xanth, if you only... But he knew it was useless. It simply was not the nature of an evil magician to devote himself to good. Here's a list of the bomb locations, he said, setting a piece of paper on the table. All you have to do is pick up the packages and bags very carefully and take them outside. Trent shook his head. I don't believe your bomb threat will work to affect your escape, Bink. The castle is not intelligent, per se. It only reacts to certain stimuli. It might let Chameleon go, but not you. In its perception, you are a magician. Therefore, you must remain. You may have outthought Rugna, but it will not comprehend the full nature of your ploy. Thus, the zombies will balk you, as before. Then we shall have to bomb it. Exactly. You will have to set off the cherries, and all of us will be destroyed together. No. We'll get outside first and heave a cherry back, if the castle cannot be bluffed. It can't be bluffed. It is not a thinking thing. It merely reacts. You will be forced to destroy it, and you know I can't permit that. I need Rugna. Now it was getting tough. Bink was ready. Chameleon will set off the bombs if you transform me, he said, feeling the chill of challenge. He didn't like this sort of power play, but had known it would come to this. If you interfere in any way. Oh, I would not break the truce, but... You can't break the truce. Either I rejoin Chameleon alone, or she heaves a cherry into a bomb. Or she heaves a cherry into a bomb. She's too stupid to do anything but follow directions. Listen to me, Bink. It is my given word that prevents me from breaking the truce, not your tactical preparations. I could transform you into a flea, and then transform a roach into your likeness, and send that likeness down to meet Chameleon. Once she set down the cherries. Bink's face reflected his chagrin. The evil magician could void the plan. Chameleon, stupid, would not catch on until too late. That nadir of intelligence worked against him as well as for him. I am not doing this, Trent said. I tell you about the possibility merely to demonstrate that I, too, have ethics. The end does not justify the means. I feel that you have allowed yourself to forget this temporarily, and if you will listen a moment, you will see your error and correct it. I cannot allow you to destroy this marvelous and historically significant edifice to no point. Already, Bink was feeling guilty. Was he to be talked out of a course he knew was right? Surely you realize, the evil magician continued persuasively, that the entire area would erupt in vengeful wrath if you did this thing. You might be outside the castle, but you would remain in the Rugna environs. And you would die horribly. Chameleon too. Chameleon too. That hurt. That beautiful girl devoured by a tangle tree, ripped apart by zombies. It is a risk I must take, Bink said grimly, though he realized the magician was correct. The way they had been herded to this castle, there would be no escaping the savagery of the forest. Maybe you will be able to persuade the castle to let us go, rather than set off that chain of events. You are a stubborn one. Yes. At least hear me out first. If I cannot persuade you, then what must be done must be, though I abhor it. Speak briefly. Bink was surprised at his own temerity, but he felt he was doing what he had to do. If Trent tried to approach within 6 feet, Bink would take off to avoid transformation. He might be able to outrun the magician, but even so, he could not wait too long. He was afraid that Chameleon would tire of waiting and do something foolish. I really don't want to see you or Chameleon die, and of course I value my own survival, Trent said. While I love nobody alive today, you two have been as close to me as anyone. It is almost as if fate has decreed that like types must be banned from the conventional society of Xanth. We... Like types? Bink exclaimed indignantly. I apologize for the indevious comparison. We have been through a great deal together in a short time, and I think it is fair to say we have saved each other's lives on occasion. Perhaps it was to associate with your like that I really returned to Xanth. Maybe so, Bink said stiffly, suppressing the mixed feelings he was experiencing. But that does not justify your conquering Xanth and probably killing many entire families. Trent looked pained, but controlled himself. I do not pretend that it does, Bink. The mundane tragedy of my family was the stimulus, not the justification for my return. I had nothing remaining in Mundania worth living for, so naturally my orientation shifted to Xanth, my homeland. I would not try to harm Xanth. I hoped to benefit from it. By opening it up to the contemporary reality before it is too late. Even if some deaths occur, this is a small price to pay for the eventual salvation of Xanth. You think Xanth won't survive unless you conquer it? Bink tried to put a sneer in his tone, but it didn't register very well. If only he had the verbal control and projection of the evil magician. Yes, actually, I do. Xanth is overdue for a new wave of colonization, and such a wave would benefit it as the prior ones did. The waves were murder and rapine and destruction. The curse of Xanth. Trent shook his head. Some were that, yes, but others were highly beneficial, such as the fourth wave, from which this castle dates. It was not the fact of the waves, but their mismanagement that made trouble. On the whole, they were essential to the progress of Xanth, but I don't expect you to believe that. Right now, I'm merely trying to persuade you to spare this castle and yourself. I'm not trying to convert you to my cause. Something about this interchange was troubling Bink increasingly. The evil magician seemed too mature, too reasonable, too knowledgeable, too committed. Trent was wrong. He had to be. Yet he spoke with such verisimilitude that Bink had difficulty pinpointing that wrongness. Try to convert me, he said. I'm glad you said that, Bink. I'd like you to know my logical rationale. Perhaps you can offer some positive critique. That sounded like a sophisticated intellectual ploy. Bink tried to perceive it as sarcasm, but he was sure it was not. He feared the magician was more intelligent than he, but he also knew what was right. Maybe I can, he said guardedly. He felt as if he were walking into the wilderness, picking the most likely paths, yet being inevitably guided to the trap at the center, Castle Rugna, on the physical and intellectual levels. Rugna had lacked a voice for 800 years, but now it had one. Bink could no more fence with that voice than he could with the magician's keen sword, yet he had to try. My rationale is dual. Part of it relates to Mundania and part to Xanth. You see, despite certain lapses in ethics and politics, Mundania has progressed remarkably in the past few centuries. Thanks to the numbers of people who have made discoveries and spread information, in many respects, it is a far more civilized region than Xanth. Unfortunately, the mundane's power of combat have also progressed. This you will have to take on faith, for I have no way to prove it here. Mundania has weapons that are easily capable of eradicating all life in Xanth, regardless of the shield. That's a lie, Bink exclaimed. Nothing can penetrate the shield. Except perhaps the three of us, Trent murmured. But the main restriction of the shield is against living things. You could charge through the shield. Your body would penetrate it quite readily, but you would be dead when you got there. Same thing. Not the same thing, Bink. You see, there are big guns that throw missiles which are dead to begin with, such as powerful bombs, like your cherry bombs, but much worse, preset to explode on contact. Xanth is a small area compared to Mundania. If the mundanes were determined, they could saturate Xanth. In such an attack, even the shield stone would be destroyed. The people of Xanth can no longer afford to ignore the mundanes. There are too many mundanes. We can't remain undiscovered forever. They can and will one day wipe us out, unless we establish relations now. Bink shook his head in disbelief and incomprehension, but Trent continued without rancor. Now, the Xanth internal aspect is quite another matter. It poses no threat to Mundania, since magic is not operative there, but it does pose an insidious but compelling threat to life as we know it in Xanth itself. Xanth poses a threat to Xanth? This is nonsense on the face of it. Now Trent's smile was a bit patronizing. I can see you would have trouble with the logic of recent Mundanian science, but he sobered before Bink could inquire about that. No, I am being unfair to you. This internal threat of Xanth is something I learned just in the past few days from my researches in the library, and it is important. This aspect alone justifies the necessity of preserving this castle, for its acclimated ancient lore is vital to Xanth society. Bink remained dubious. We've lived without this library for 8 centuries. We can live without it now. Ah, but the matter of that life. Trent shook his head, as if perceiving something too vast to be expressed. He got up and moved to a shelf behind him. He took down a book and rifled carefully through its creaking old pages. He sat it down before Bink. Open. What is that picture? A dragon, Bink said promptly. Trent flipped a page. And this? A manticora. What was the point? The pictures were very nice. They did not concede precisely with contemporary creatures. The proportions and details were subtly wrong. And this? It was a picture of a human-headed quadruped with hooves, a horse's tail, and cat-like forelegs. Lamia. And this? A centaur. Look, we can admire pictures all day, but what do these creatures have in common? Trent asked. They have human heads or 4 parts, except the dragon, though the one in this book has an almost human shortness of snout. Some have human intelligence, but exactly. Consider the sequence. Trace a dragon back through their similar species, and it becomes increasingly manlike. Does that suggest anything to you? Just that some creatures are more manlike than others, but that's no threat to Xanth. Anyway, most of these pictures are out of date. The actual creatures don't look quite like that anymore. Did the centaurs teach you the theory of evolution? Oh, sure. That today's creatures are evolved from more primitive ones, selected for survival. Go back far enough and you find a common ancestor. Right. But in Mundania, creatures like the Lamia, Manticora, and Dragon never evolved. Of course not. They're magic. They evolved by magic selection. Only in Xanth can... Yet obviously Xanth creatures started from mundane ancestors. They have so many affinities. All right, Bink said impatiently. They descended from mundanes. What has that got to do with your conquering Xanth? According to conventional centaur history, man has been in Xanth only 1,000 years, Trent said. In that period, there have been 10 major waves of immigration from Mundania. 12, Bink said. That depends on how you count them. At any rate, this continued for 900 years, until the shield cut off those migrations. Yet there are many partially human forms that predate the supposed arrival of human beings. Does that seem to be significant? Bink was increasingly worried that Chameleon would foul up, or that the castle would figure out a way to neutralize the cherry bombs. He was not certain that Castle Rugna could not think for itself. Was the evil magician stalling to make time for this? I'll give you 1 more minute to make your case, then we're going, regardless. How could partially human forms have evolved unless they had human ancestors? Convergent evolution doesn't create the unnatural mishmash monsters we have here. It creates creatures adapted to their ecological niches. And human features fit few niches. There had to have been people in Xanth many thousands of years ago. All right, Bink agreed. 30 seconds. These people must have interbred with animals to form the composites we know. The centaurs, manticoras, merfolk, harpies, and all. And the creatures crossbred among themselves, and the composites interbred with other composites, producing things like the chimera. Bink turned to go. I think your minute is up, he said. Then he froze. They what? The species mated with other species to create hybrids. Man-headed beasts. Beast-headed men. Impossible. Men can only mate with men. I mean, with women. It would be unnatural to... Xanth is an unnatural land, Bink. Magic makes remarkable things possible. Bink saw that logic defied emotion. But even if they did, he said with difficulty, that still doesn't justify your conquering Xanth. What's past is past. A change of government won't. I think this background does justify my assumption of power, Bink, because the accelerated evolution and mutation produced by magic and interspecies miscegnation is changing Xanth. If we remain cut off from the mundane world, there will, in time, be no human beings left, only crossbreeds. Only the constant influx of pure stock in the last millennium has enabled men to maintain his type, and there really are not too many human beings here now. Our population is diminishing, not through famine, disease, or war, but through the attraction of crossbreeding. The attrition of crossbreeding. When a man mates with a harpy, the result is not a man-child. No, Bink cried, horrified. No one would breed with a filthy harpy. Filthy harpy, perhaps not. But how about a clean, pretty harpy? Trent inquired with a lift of his eyebrow. They aren't all alike, you know. We see only their outcasts, not their fresh young. No. Suppose he had drunk from a love spring accidentally, and the next to drink there was a harpy. No, But Bink knew better. A love spell provided an overriding compulsion. He remembered his experience with the love spring by the chasm, from which he had almost drunk. Before seeing the griffin and the unicorn in their embrace, there had been a harpy there. He shuddered reminiscently. Have you ever been tempted by an attractive mermaid or a lady centaur? Trent persisted. No, but an insidious memory picture of the elegant, firm mermaid breasts came to him, and Sherry, the centaur who had given him a lift during the first leg of his journey to see the magician Humphrey, when he touched her, had it really been accidental? She had threatened to drop him in a trench, but she hadn't been serious. She was a very nice filly. Rather, person. Honestly compelled his reluctant correction. Maybe. And surely there were others less scrupulous than you, Trent continued inexorably. They might indulge in certain circumstances, might they not? Just for variety? Don't the boys of your village hang around the centaur grounds on the sly as they did in my day? Boys like Zinc and Jama and Potiphar, bullies and troublemakers who had caused ire in the centaur camp. Bink remembered that too. He had missed the significance before. Of course they had gone to see the bare-breasted centaur fillies, and if they caught one alone... Bink knew his face was red. What are you getting at? He demanded, trying to cover his embarrassment. Just this. Xanth must have had contact with Mundania long before the date of our earliest records, before the waves, because only in Mundania is the human species pure. From the time a man sets foot in Xanth, he begins to change. He develops magic, and his children develop more magic, until some of them become full-fledged magicians, and if they remain, they inevitably become magic themselves, or their descendants do, either by breaking down the natural barriers between species, or by evolving into imps, elves, goblins, giants, trolls. Did you get a good look at Humphrey? He's a gnome, Bink said without thinking. Then, oh no, he's a man, and a good one, but he's well along the route to something else. He's at the height of his magical powers now, but his children, if he ever has any, may be true gnomes. I dare say he knows this, which is why he won't marry, and consider Chameleon. She has no direct magic because she has become magic. This is the way the entire human populace of Xanth will go inevitably. Unless there is a steady infusion of new blood from Mundania, the shield must come down. The magic creatures of Xanth must be permitted to migrate outside, freely, there to revert slowly and naturally to their original species. New animals must come in. But Bink found himself fumbling with the horrors of these concepts. If there was always an interchange before, what happened to the people who came thousands of years ago? Probably there was some obstruction for a while, cutting off migration. Xanth could have been a true island for 1,000 years or so, trapping the original prehistoric human settlers, so that they merged entirely with the existing forms and gave rise to the centaurs and other sports. It is happening again under the shield. Human beings must... Enough, Bink whispered, fundamentally shocked. I can't listen to any more. You will defuse the cherry bombs? Like a bolt of lightning, sanity returned. No! I'm taking Chameleon and leaving. Now! But you have to understand. No! The evil magician was beginning to make sense. If Bink listened any more, he would be subverted, and Xanth would be lost. What you suggest is an abomination. It cannot be true. I cannot accept it. Trent sighed with seemingly genuine regret. Well, it was worth a try. Though I did fear you would reject it, I still cannot permit you to destroy this castle. Bink braced himself to move, to get out of transformation range, 6 feet. Trent shook his head. No need to flee, Bink. I shall not break the truce. I could have done that when I showed you the pictures, but I value my given word. So I must compromise. If you will not join me, I shall have to join you. What? Bink, whose ears were almost closed to the evil magician's beguiling logic, was caught off guard. Spare Castle Rugna. Defuse the bombs. I will see you safely clear of these environs. This was way too easy. Your word? My word, Trent said solemnly. You can make the castle let us go? Yes. This is another facet of what I have learned in these archives. I have only to speak the proper words to it, and it will even facilitate our departure. Your word, Bink repeated suspiciously. So far, Trent had not broken it. Yet what guarantee was there? No tricks? No sudden change of mind? My word is honor, Bink. What could he do? If the magician wanted to break the truce, he could transform Bink into a tadpole now, and sneak up on Chameleon and transform her, and Bink was inclined to trust him. All right. Go and defuse your bombs. I will settle with Rugna. Bink went. Chameleon met with him with a glad little cry, and this time he was quite satisfied to accept her embrace. Trent has agreed to get us out of here, he told her. "Oh, Bink, I'm so glad," she exclaimed, kissing him. He had to grab her hand to make sure she didn't drop the cherry bomb she still held. She was growing lovelier by the hour. Her personality was not changing much, except as her diminishing intelligence caused her to be less complex, less suspicious. He liked that personality, and now, he had to admit, he liked her beauty too. She was of Xanth. She was magic. She did not try to manipulate him for her private purpose. She was his type of girl. But he knew that her stupidity would turn him off, just as her ugliness during the other phase had. He could live with neither a lovely moron nor an ugly genius. She was attractive only right now, while her intelligence was fresh in his memory and her beauty was manifest to his sight and touch. To believe otherwise would be folly. He drew away from her. "We have to remove the bombs, carefully," he said. But what about the emotional bombs within him? And that concludes today. And we shall see you guys next week with Chapter 14. There's only 3 episodes left of this series. So we've got 3 more weeks, and then we'll start a new book.